Hello, everyone. This is Sharon Munoz, and this is my thoughts and expectations of a preacher and a worship, of preaching and worship, specifically in an ELCA uh, church context. So ELCA stands for Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and in the context where I'm currently serving, it does follow a traditional liturgical structure. So because of that, I do expect a worship service that follows a very clear, intentional flow where each part of the liturgy builds onto the next and helps the congregation's attention throughout the service. So the service begins with a prelude, and that sets the tone. It tells everyone that worship has started. No, there's no singing. It's just listening to whoever's playing on the piano, and that's another element. There is only a piano. There's no band. There's no guitar. And then comes the opening hymn, which is where the congregation stands or sits, whatever they find most comfortable. And we sing together again, and it's our voices, a hymn book, and the pianist. And after that, the service moves into confession and forgiveness, which with confession and forgiveness for this, I'd like to share what is said. This is from our Easter service. The leader said, "Let us confess our sin before God, who removes our guilt and blots out all offenses." And then there's a moment of silence. And the congregation responds with, "We confess that we are captive to sin and cannot free ourselves." And we say that all together in unison. And it's a bit longer than that, but for time's sake, that's part of it. So that then shifts the tone from like this welcome to service, it's Easter Sunday, into something that's a little more reflective. But the language there is very specific, and it's familiar to me. I believe it's familiar to lots of people, especially if they grew up within the Lutheran Church. And yeah, it's meant to kind of serve as like a moment of honesty before God, because we've all sinned, and so that is recognized. From there, the service moves into scripture reading, followed by the gospel reading, which is given a distinct focus. That's where the congregation is asked to stand yet again. And yeah, after the readings comes the message or sermon, and it's in this part of the service where I don't expect anything overly performative, but I do expect intentionality. There's actually a joke too, because thinking of intentionality, there's also some humor surrounding the length of a sermon, and the joke in Lutheran spaces is that preachers do not go over 8 minutes. If they do, you're losing them. But it does kind of reflect that culture and that environment in the Lutheran space. If there's more time, and if there was more time, I would think that an ordained preacher especially would have more time or more freedom to move and speak more conversationally, or even step away from the pulpit and, or if they have a mic in hand, and kind of go towards the congregation. Because I think if it's done well, the service can still stay and grounded and reflective. But yeah, what matters most to me isn't style or whether or not they step away, although I think that would kind of create more of an inviting tone. But it does help, and it does matter to me if it's thoughtful and connected rather than something that's rehearsed or distant. And distance, it really depends. Because sometimes we do have lay people who have a manuscript and they read it word for word. That portion of it maybe because it's expected, or that it's more okay for a layperson to read from a manuscript, and it's not that okay for an ordained pastor to read from a manuscript. Like, we kind of expect them to memorize their sermon or what they're going to say and just be really confident. But yeah, it really depends on who's delivering the message. But after the message is shared, the congregation stands to confess the Apostles' Creed, and we say that together again. That's another moment of unity in the service, and then this is followed by prayers of intercession. And we're told after each petition, the leader will say, "Merciful God," and says the prayer, says the prayer, then signals to us as they say, "Merciful God," then the congregation responds with, "Receive our prayer." And that's a repeated response for about 10, 15 prayers of intercession. And it keeps the congregation focused in that rhythm of prayer. But there is a particular moment within the intercessions that stands out to me, especially in the Easter season context. From this past Sunday, the leader, and I'll read it out loud here. The leader said, "Gentle shepherd, like the woman at the empty tomb, many grieve or feel lost and afraid. Draw near to those who are ill or in pain. Reveal yourself to them as the risen one." And in their moment, the preacher or the leader encourages people to say, in that silence, following what they said, in that silence, that people whisper, say the names out loud or in their hearts of the names of loved ones or those they are praying for. And it's it's a very intimate moment of the service, of the whole service. It happens every Sunday, but every time, just hearing the voices of the congregation say those names out loud, it is a beautiful, beautiful part. And just holding space for that, it does something. Like, it just feels like we're all carrying something. Someone is grieving, someone is hurt, and we are just taking that moment to reflect and to say those names out loud. It's very, very significant. And I haven't experienced that elsewhere, where that moment is intentionally put into a service. And here it's every Sunday. So, but after the prayers of intercession, the service continues, depending on if we have an ordained pastor or if it's a lay person leading the worship. So if there is an ordained pastor, we move into Holy Communion, which includes its own structured language, responses, and a shared meal. If it's a lay leader, the service goes instead into our offering prayer. And in our context, there's a space in the back of the worship space where there's votives, these little candles that people can light as a form of prayer or remembrance. And so it's just another way that people can kind of worship outside of those spoken words. And I do enjoy that as well. And then the service starts to wind down. It winds down into, there's another hymn, gathering the congregation just one more time in song. And finally, it concludes with the blessing and the very familiar exchange of "peace be with you," and the response, "and also with you." And it's sending people out with a sense of closure and peace, and that announcements are about to be shared, and opportunities of ministry. That's when we share that too. But overall, I do expect a worship service to be structured and deeply participatory. I really come to appreciate a traditional liturgical setting, because it does kind of shape how attention moves from beginning to end. Each part, from like the confession to scripture to intercession, it has its own rhythm and language that invites participation. People aren't forced to do this, but they can join if they want to. And overall, I just value a service like that. It feels grounded, it's intentional, it's reflective, where even silence and repetition are very meaningful, rather than just pauses in it. So yeah, thank you for listening to this. This is my expectations from an ELCA traditional setting.